Welcome to today's explainer on Angie Thomas's incredibly powerful novel, The Hate You Give. We're going to logically unpack the devastating psychological and systemic toll of a tragic shooting, entirely through the eyes of a 16-year-old girl named Star Carter. We're calling this The Anatomy of a System Crash, because as you'll see, what happens to Star isn't just a single isolated tragedy, it is a profound structural collapse of her entire daily reality. Let's jump right in.
Okay, imagine for a second that your own brain is a smartphone. Now think about the sheer cognitive energy it would take to permanently run two completely incompatible operating systems at the exact same time. One system is programmed entirely for your home, your neighborhood, and your family, right? But the other one is programmed strictly for your school or your workplace. You literally have to swipe left and become a completely different person depending on where you are. Sounds absolutely exhausting, doesn't it?
Well, this brilliantly illustrates the brutal mechanics of code switching. And let's be clear, we aren't just talking about swapping out a few vocabulary words to fit in with a crowd. For Star, this is an exhausting, hyper-vigilant threat assessment algorithm built right into our everyday identity. It functions as a deeply ingrained psychological survival mechanism. She has to spend massive amounts of cognitive energy acting as a permanent identity firewall, basically ensuring these two worlds never ever communicate, just to make the people around her comfortable.
You really see this intense self-editing in action when you compare Garden Heights Star with Williamson Prep Star. Back in her home neighborhood of Garden Heights, she hides in an oversized hoodie, actively trying to blend into the wallpaper so she isn't labeled bougie by her peers. But 45 minutes away at the affluent, predominantly white Williamson Prep, she meticulously controls her facial expressions, totally drops any slang, and actively manages her tone so she remains flawlessly non-threatening to her wealthy classmates. It is a staggering psychological tax to pay every single day.
But what happens when a traumatic, life-altering event hits that carefully balanced mental framework like a computer virus? Boom. Total system crash. The firewall holding those two heavily guarded worlds apart violently melts down. For Star, the catalyst for this crash happens in a single night. She's leaving a spring break party after gunshots erupt, and she gets a ride home with her childhood best friend, Khalil.
The crash officially begins with a terrifying traffic stop by a police officer, a guy whose badge number Star instantly sears into her memory, 115. The moment those flashing blue lights appear in the rearview mirror, Star instantly reverts to what is known as the talk. This is a grim, deeply ingrained survival protocol taught to black youth on exactly how to interact with law enforcement. The rules are absolute. Keep your hands visible, make no sudden moves, show absolute robotic compliance. She's literally forced to override every natural human impulse of fear or confusion just to survive the encounter.
And the contrast here is absolutely stark. You have Star's frozen, prey-like obedience right next to Khalil's natural teenage annoyance. Khalil asks why he's being pulled over, which is a totally basic human reaction. He just doesn't run the same rigid mental program that Star does. This brilliantly highlights a crucial systemic critique from the story, the way the burden of de-escalation is routinely inverted. The expectation for absolute, flawless perfection is placed on the terrified civilian teenager rather than the highly trained adult professional carrying a weapon. Tragically, the officer pulls Khalil out of the car, searches him, and finds absolutely nothing. But when Khalil simply moves to open the car door to check on his terrified friend, Officer 115 shoots him 3 times in the back. For Star, witnessing this instantly reactivates acute PTSD. See, when she was just 10 years old, she watched her other childhood friend, Natasha, die in a gang crossfire. Her developing brain was already hardwired to associate her environment with sudden, catastrophic loss. And in that moment, that old trauma circuit is violently reactivated. From there, the nightmare shifts into a fierce battle for the narrative. Star goes to the police station expecting justice, right? But detectives Gomez and Wilkes launch into an absolute masterclass in misdirection. Just look at the disparity in their questioning. They're asking if Khalil drank alcohol, if he sold narcotics, if he was in a gang. What are they ignoring? Literally any questions about the officer's tone, his positioning, or his justification for using lethal force. They are functionally putting the dead boy on trial while totally ignoring the shooter.
Later, when society eventually discovers that Khalil was indeed selling drugs, the story asks us to impartially examine the systemic context of his choices. He was operating out of pure desperation. Think about it. His mother was struggling with a severe crack addiction, he owed a massive debt to a ruthless local gang leader named King, and the grandmother who raised him lost her hospital job because she was too weak from chemotherapy treatments to actually work. Khalil quite literally felt he had zero other options to keep his family alive.
This revelation sparks a profound ideological collision right in Star's own living room, and it perfectly captures two sides of a very real-world debate. You have her father, Maverick, who points to a system engineered to funnel marginalized kids into impossible choices, a classic systemic critique. On the flip side, you have Uncle Carlos, who is a police officer himself. He defends the system, arguing that everyday people just don't understand the sheer terror of approaching a vehicle in the dark. He points out that officers are flawed human beings forced to make terrifying, split-second decisions under immense pressure. The story neutrally presents both of these worldviews colliding head-on.
But here is the crucial takeaway. While Khalil's past is legally irrelevant to the officer's split-second decision to pull that trigger, the media relies heavily on those after-the-fact details. They use them to build what is known as the perfect victim trope. It's basically society's demand that victims of systemic violence must be entirely flawless if they want to be deemed worthy of justice, empathy, or even basic grace.
So why do we do this? Why does society weaponize a victim's past in this way? Well, reducing Khalil to just a suspected drug dealer gives the public a convenient psychological out. It absolves the justice system of accountability. A lot of viewers at home actively want the victim to be flawed because, honestly, if they aren't perfect, everyday people are forced to face the terrifying reality that the system is broken and this kind of systemic violence could happen to literally anyone. It's a massive societal defense mechanism.
Amidst all this immense unresolved grief, Star actually tries to return to her polished, safe life at Williamson Prep. But as you'd expect, we get a data bleed. The pressure cooker whistles, and that psychological firewall simply melts down. Her two isolated worlds, which she guarded so heavily for so long, begin to infect one another. The trauma is simply way too massive to contain within her carefully curated prep school persona. We see the exact mechanics of this bleed and, honestly, the precise anatomy of gaslighting during a gym class basketball game. Star's friend Haley makes a highly insensitive, racist, fried chicken comment. When Star understandably gets upset and walks off the court, Haley doesn't apologize, not at all. Instead, she frames the cruelty as just a joke, acts super defensive, and ultimately shifts the entire burden of guilt right back onto Star, making her feel like she's the one being overly sensitive. It's a perfect, textbook breakdown of casual cruelty. This psychological toll eventually forces Star into a devastating act of social self-preservation right in the locker room. Her friends start bringing up the news of Khalil's death, but they talk about it as if it's just an interesting, theoretical news debate. Totally unable to bridge the massive gap between their extreme social privilege and her lived trauma, Star panics. She literally denies even knowing Khalil to her friends. It's a split-second betrayal that instantly mirrors the biblical story of Peter denying Jesus, erasing every memory they shared just to protect her comfortable facade. And, this systemic violence doesn't just impact her friendships, it actually infiltrates and poisons her most intimate romantic relationships, and it does so through sheer biology. The amygdala is the region of our brain responsible for processing fear and threat detection. Its activation in Star proves that trauma responses are entirely physiological, not logical. Visual triggers bypass our reasoning entirely, and biology just takes the wheel. As they say, the body keeps the score. Because trauma completely bypasses logic, Star's nervous system violently overrides her in the school hallway. When her well-meaning white boyfriend Chris playfully grabs her hands to comfort her, Star experiences a visceral trauma response. She looks at his hands and literally hallucinates Officer 15's hands, the gun, and Khalil's blood on the pavement. She physically recoils from him, which just goes to show how deeply systemic violence infiltrates every single corner of a person's life.
To really grasp the profound, cyclical nature of this entire tragedy, we have to look at the acronym Khalil shared with Star just moments before those blue police lights ever appeared in his rearview mirror. It was Tupac Shakur's THUGLIFE, the hate you give little infants fops everybody. The core concept here is that whatever society gives to its youth, whether that's poverty, violence, or total lack of grace, will inevitably, eventually, bite society back.
So as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with one final, crucial question to chew on. What hate is our society currently giving its youth today? Think back to those two operating systems we talked about at the very beginning. What prejudices, quick trigger assumptions, and systemic barriers are we passing down to the next generation right now? And how long will it be until we all inevitably feel the devastating consequences of that cycle? Thank you so much for joining me, and keep questioning the structures around you.